Okay, so everybody's talking about a housing market crash, right? Like it's this big scary thing looming over us.
Yeah, it's definitely got people's attention.
It makes you wonder, like, are we on the verge of another real estate roller coaster? Which is exactly what we're diving into today with Andranik Aghazarian's Cold War 2.0, Dawn of the Asian Millennium. We're really going to dig into what he sees coming down the line for the U.S. housing market.
And this is something that, whether you're renting or buying or just trying to figure out what to do with your money,
It affects everyone,
it
right?
does. It really does.
So Aghazarian doesn't beat around the bush. He comes right out with some pretty startling facts.
Yeah, he does.
He says that the Federal Reserve has pumped, get this, $1 trillion
Wow.
into mortgage bonds, trying to keep the whole system afloat.
$1 trillion. That's with a T.
Trillion with a T. $1,000 billion.
It's hard to even fathom that kind of money.
It's an insane amount.
It really is, and I think it highlights just how fragile things are right now.
So what is it exactly? I mean, explain to me. Like, I don't fully understand what mortgage bonds are and why this is significant that they're pumping so much money into it.
So imagine mortgage bonds like a big pot of loans, right? All these mortgages bundled together, and the Fed's basically trying to prop up that pot, prevent it from boiling over. Because if that pot goes, it could have a ripple effect to the whole economy.
And it's not just the Fed that's worried. I mean, Aghazarian quotes one expert who's predicting this crash could be, get this, twice as severe as the 2008 housing crisis.
Yeah, and that one really makes you think because 2008 was no joke.
Not at all. And he also compares it to Japan's lost decade.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a cautionary tale, right?
Absolutely, and that's a comparison that should make everyone pay attention.
So it just seems like everywhere you turn, these alarm bells are ringing. But what I found really interesting is that Aghazarian is really skeptical of all the positive spin that a lot of people are putting on the current economic situation.
Yeah, it's like everything's fine, the stock market is up. But Aghazarian is saying, hold on a second.
Right. He's saying, look at what's actually happening to everyday people.
Exactly. It's a disconnect from reality.
It's like we're being shown one thing, but the reality on the ground is something totally different.
It is. It's like focusing on GDP, this big abstract number, but ignoring the struggles of individuals.
So he's basically saying propping up these asset prices, it's not a sustainable solution.
Not in the long run, no.
It's like we're being shown one thing, but the reality on the ground is something totally different.
It is. It's like focusing on GDP, this big abstract number, but ignoring the struggles of individuals.
So we've got these alarm bells, we've got these warning signs, but what exactly is causing all of this? What led us to this point?
Well, Aghazarian lays it out as this kind of like a perfect storm of factors, right?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ones is those crazy house prices we've been seeing. They're skyrocketing.
Yeah, it's way beyond like a normal seller's market.
Oh, absolutely. And he points to things like those low interest rates we talked about earlier, right? Cheap money makes it easier to borrow more, which drives up demand. And when everybody's bidding on the same houses, prices just go insane. It's like a bidding war on a national scale. And then on top of that, you've got foreign investors, people all over the world looking at U.S. real estate as a safe place to put their money. So it's not just people who live here.
So how is anyone supposed to compete with that? I mean, especially if you're just trying to get into the market for the first time.
That's the thing. It's really tough. He paints a pretty bleak picture for young people, especially, saddled with student debt, struggling to even afford rent, let alone a down payment. It's like the finish line keeps moving further and further away.
It's a real struggle, for sure.
Yeah.
And as if that weren't enough, Aghazarian also talks about the rising household debt, which is kind of terrifying.
It's a huge issue because if you think about it, a lot of families are already stretched thin. They're using credit cards just to get by, so any little shock to the system.
Like a job loss, medical bills.
Exactly. That's all it takes. And then they might start missing those mortgage payments, which could lead to foreclosures.
And that's when the real trouble starts.
Right, because if enough people start defaulting, you get this flood of properties back on the market.
And prices plummet.
And that's not good for anyone.
Yeah.
Not for homeowners, not for the economy as a whole. It's like this domino effect.
And we can't forget about the elephant in the room, or I guess the Airbnb in the room. Like, what impact has the whole short-term rental trend had on everything?
Right, because that's another piece of the puzzle. On one hand, these platforms give homeowners more options, right? Like they can make some extra cash. But on the other hand, it means there are fewer places available for long-term renters, especially in those hot tourist spots.
So it's pushing out the people who actually live and work there. Man, it's easy to feel kind of helpless with all of this. Like, what can you even do when you're up against these huge economic forces? It feels like you're just along for the ride. It's easy to feel kind of helpless with all of this. Like, what can you even do when you're up against these huge economic forces? It feels like you're just along for the ride.
It can feel that way for sure, but I think that's where Aghazarian's insights are so valuable. Because he doesn't just leave us with doom and gloom. He actually offers some practical steps for how to navigate all this uncertainty.
Okay, so instead of panicking, we should be making a plan. What kind of advice does he give? What can people actually do to prepare for a potential downturn?
Well, he's very clear that nobody has a crystal ball, right? Like, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But he says if you're thinking about buying a house right now, proceed with caution.
So no more bidding wars.
He'd probably say try to avoid them if you can. Don't get so caught up in the hype,
Yeah.
Be realistic about what you can afford long term.
Should don't overextend yourself, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to be stuck with a mortgage they can't afford if things go south.
Absolutely. So that's for buyers. What about renters? Any advice for people who might be feeling stuck in a tough situation?
He says it's more important than ever to know your rights as a tenant.
Like what your lease says, what the law is in your area.
Exactly. And if you're having trouble making rent, don't wait until the last minute to talk to your landlord. Open communication is key.
So communication and planning, those seem to be the big takeaways here.
Definitely. And no matter what your situation is, renting or owning, having that financial cushion is crucial.
Like an emergency fund.
Exactly. Something to fall back on if things get rough.
Makes sense. But it sounds like Aghazarian is also saying this goes beyond just individual choices, that there are bigger systemic issues at play here.
Oh, absolutely. He's pretty critical of the way things are set up.
Like what?
Well, he argues that this housing crisis and all the factors that are feeding into it, they expose some fundamental flaws in our economic system. Like, it's not just about individual people making bad decisions. It's about a system that's,
Broken.
well, maybe not totally broken, but he'd probably say it needs some serious work. We need to create a system that's more resilient, more equitable, so that everyone has a chance to thrive.
That's a pretty powerful message. And it makes you realize this isn't just an abstract economic issue, right?
This is about real people's lives.
It's about having a safe and affordable place to call home. And it's something that we all have a stake in. So what can we do as individuals, as a society, to create that kind of future? How do we build a housing market that works for everyone? Well, those are questions that deserve their own deep dive, and hopefully we've given you some things to think about in the meantime.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand these issues, the better equipped we are to find solutions.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up. But we want to hear from you. What resonated with you from our conversation? What questions do you have about the future of housing? Head over to our website, send us an email. Let's keep this conversation going because this is something that affects all of us. Thanks for listening.